Welcome to this special film looking at some of the old photographs of Guildford in the collection of Guildford Heritage Services. My name is Melanie Holliker, and today I'm in conversation with local historian David Rose, looking at some of the photos of North Street. Welcome, David.
Hi, Melanie. Thank you very much for having me again.
It's a pleasure.
Good.
So we're going to start with an amazing photo of of North Street, looking really deserted, not something we're familiar with.
No, that's right. It is. It's gosh, it looks like there's one person in there. There's not many people at all. This picture dates to about the 1870s, and yeah, if you just imagine today that the motor traffic going up and down it, yeah, it really is quite quiet indeed. The building on the right is recognisable. It's now the public loos. It has been for quite a while, but back then it was Guildford's fire station, and pretty new building at that time. It was constructed in 1872. If you look down further in the street, there's a couple of buildings that may be recognisable as still being there, but so much really has disappeared. Replaced by other buildings, which in some cases, have gone in more recent times. A lot of big changes at the end of the 50s and into the 60s there, and of course Guildford's scheduled for another long overdue makeover, particularly in North Street. Different plans have been drawn up and presented several times, even in the past 20-25 years, and we hope that one day they'll come to fruition. I'm just going to add one other thing that's just come into my mind. The tree there on the left there, that was a place where the public could gather, and often did, a little bit like Speaker's Corner in London, where somebody would get on their soapbox and try and gather a crowd around to put their point of view across. So yeah, a lot of changes in North Street, and I now think we're going to have another look at another picture of the fire station.
Yes, that's right. I love this photo because you've got all the fire brigade in their wonderful uniforms. And I know from working at the Guildhall, which we look after in Heritage Services, that the town fire engine used to be kept in the Guildhall, but obviously a special building was constructed for it.
Yeah, that's right. This dates from, the fire station was built in 1872, and I think there'd been another building where they put the fire engine, which was just a shed really, and that. And of course, in those days, fire brigades were a volunteer force, and the firemen who signed up to be volunteers, they were given some sort of financial recompense, but only when they attended a fire, and during the time that the fire station was in North Street, there were a lot of photographs taken of it, right away going through into the 1900s, and this era that I often talk about of the picture postcard. And you get pictures of not only the firemen, but obviously of their fire engines and their appliances, and sometimes giving demonstrations on how they worked. You can see in this picture how the ladder has been extended up against the building, and some of the firemen are climbing up it. So obviously they're doing a bit of a showing off there and displaying what they can do. We've got to remember, of course, that when we come into sort of motorised fire engines, it was by about 1908 that the Guildford firm Dennis Brothers started producing fire engines, and Guildford had Dennis made appliances for many years. Now, in 1937, the fire station moved to a purpose-built, a brand new building down in Ladymead that was facing the then new Guildford and Godalming bypass. And the current fire station there, which replaced that, was opened in June 2015. It was opened by the Duke of Gloucester and Guildford's MP then, Anne Milton.
Lovely. We've got a really diverse selection of photos of North Street. So this next one is a completely different view. It's market day. Such an amazing photograph.
Gosh, it is, isn't it? Absolutely bustling, doesn't it, there, compared to the other one where it's pretty much empty. Yeah, as we mentioned in the other film in this series, the cattle market moved from the High Street to North Street in 1865 because of the traffic in the High Street. But by the 1890s, the market here, with its sheep and its cattle pens, were also causing problems to traffic movement. So a new cattle market was established in Woodbridge Road, That's where the law courts are now, and the police station. And this photo shows the final North Street cattle market on June the 9th, 1896. Anybody who knows a bit about Guildford photographs of old, and perhaps has read books and seen them in exhibitions and whatever, might quite know that there are several variations of this picture, and they're noticeable by the way the auctioneer is standing in front of the white tent. And this picture was taken through the window of an upstairs room of a pub called the Crown. Now that used to join the Cloth Hall building, if we know the Cloth Hall, which is near Jeffreys Passage and the Guildford Library. So the pub, the Crown, was joined to that, and it stuck out into the road. But that was pulled down in 1906, again, to allow traffic to move more freely through the town. You know, and I have to say, traffic congestion in Guildford has been a problem for years. It's not just a thing that we've got today. Can we have a look at the next one then, please, Melanie?
Yes, I think that pub you were talking about, David, does it feature in this photo here of the top of North Street?
Yes, you can just see the Crown there. So on the right, there's the tree that I mentioned in the other picture, and just behind that, you can see the Crown, poking out there on that. And on the other side of the road, there is, of course, the Horse and Groom Pub, which one of the pubs that, of course, unfortunately was bombed by the IRA in 1974. But this, as we see, is the late or the early 1890s, a few years before the market closed. But to me, even though there's lots going on there, it really doesn't tell the full story of the markets. One, we can only just imagine what the smells were like. But when it was market day on Tuesdays, pubs were allowed to be open from the early hours, and there was an awful lot of drunkenness among those visiting the town. You know, it was a place to come to, whether you were a farmer or not. People flocked into the town, probably because the pubs were open all day as well. And if you look at back copies of newspapers of the time, you'll find reports from the magistrates' court of people being found guilty of being drunk and behaving badly. And they were often arrested, you know, during the daytime when the market was in full swing, and that's men and women alike.
Goodness me. Well, I can see why they decided to move the market from North Street, both because of the actual, you know, animals themselves and because of the behaviour maybe that was happening. We've got another view here of North Street. Again, I think it's market day, but a different kind of market and much quieter, it would appear.
So yes, we've got Guildford's vegetable and flower market. Now that used to take place in North Street on Saturdays, as of course it still does today, really. And growers and farmers would travel from miles around, you know, to sell their goods. Outlying villages and outlying towns come into Guildford. Can you imagine coming a good sort of perhaps 10 miles with your horse and cart, bringing your goods to sell there? And in this picture, because I always like looking closer to it and trying to imagine what the day was like then, and it looks like it was a bit of a sunny day. Two of the women are holding parasols, and there's a small child in a wheelchair there, isn't there? You can also see a police sergeant who's joined the throng for the photographer for the picture. The policeman was likely to be of the Guildford Borough Police Force, and you can see its police station just behind the market stalls and to the right. The police station was opened actually in June 1893, so this picture must date between then and June 1896, when the vegetable and flower market, like the cattle market, moved to Woodbridge Road. And Melody, were you just going to say a little bit about the child in the wheelchair?
I think yes. I mean, it's amazing, isn't it? I don't think I've ever seen another photo, Victorian or an Edwardian photograph, with somebody in a wheelchair, because that would have been a really expensive piece of equipment at the time. So most of the most of the people, adults or children with a disability who needed a wheelchair, their families just wouldn't have been able to afford it. So these photos are wonderful to see that kind of detail.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And we've got another picture of the market, because this is such a kind of key feature of North Street, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Of course. When that market moved down to Woodbridge Road, of course, Guildford in the town centre part was bereft of a market for a few years, but it returned. The fruit and veg returned to North Street after the First World War, because during the Great War, many people had been encouraged to grow their own produce, because by late 1917, Britain was really on the verge of starvation because so many ships bringing food were being sunk by the German Navy. But after the war, once imports had increased, many people continued to grow their own produce, and they had a surplus to sell. So the idea was that the North Street market was set up again as a way for them to sell off some of the things that they didn't need themselves. And of course, it became very, very popular. Perhaps its heyday then, certainly in the interwar period, was the 1930s. When more than just food was being sold at the market. You know, traders were coming from as far away as London, and the market continued then into the evening. Just imagine that today. You know, their market on a Friday and a Saturday closes at the end of the afternoon, doesn't it, trading period? But back then, it continued into the evening. That it was obviously lit with lamps and goods being sold. It was things like china, glass, clocks, watches, jewellery, all sorts of items. And these were the days, and some people, well, probably few people are remembering it now, but it was the days of a trader called Garcia. Now, he was known as the Chocolate King because, of course, he had a stall full of chocolate. And there was another man whose surname was Marx, and he was known as the Fruit King because of obviously this stall would have been just overflowing with wonderful fruit to sell.
Wow, David, I wish I'd been able to go to that evening market and visit the chocolate stall as well. It sounds amazing. And we're going to end with the last picture of the market because, as I said, it is such a key feature in North Street's history.
Yes, so this is the 1960s. There you can see the stall. So it doesn't look too different from today that much. But again, I think this picture is worth noting. Again, the buildings in it, they're of interest, as we mentioned in the first picture, how buildings have come and have gone somewhat in North Street. North Street always being the sort of second string to the high street there. On the left here, buildings still exist. That was Bernard's the Butchers because there were lots of different traders then. Bernard's had 2 shops in North Street at one point. And there are other butchers there, Matthews and Baxter's, I can remember those. And then fishmongers as well. Withy's probably the one that people remember most. There was another fishmonger called George's, and then also Mac Fisheries, which was obviously not just a local firm. They had a shop there before they moved up to Market Street for a period. Now, in the distance, you can see the spire of the Methodist Church. That building went in around 1973 after Guildford Methodists, they moved to a new place of worship down in Woodbridge Road. But often of these lost buildings, you know, I do hear people say that, oh, that should never have been pulled down. But unfortunately, some of them, you know, weren't fit for purpose. There wasn't the means to perhaps be the creativity of transforming a building into something else. And I'm sure that the Methodist Church was not fit for purpose as a place for worship or anything much else, and that's why it went. You can see some buildings under construction there. Before that, there have been the buildings known as the County and Borough Halls. Possibly they may have been worth saving if they could have been repurposed there. And you know, those developers didn't have the imagination as if they do today. And then moving up a little bit further on the right there, you can see the Surrey Arms pub. That is now occupied, or currently is, by Virgin Money Bank. And next to it was then one of the a millet store, the outdoor clothing and camping firm.
Thank you, David. That's been absolutely fascinating. Yeah, I hope all of our viewers have enjoyed looking at the old photos with us too. And if you would like to see any more historic photos of Guildford, then you can take a look at our online exhibition, Guildford Streets, and the link for that is in the description box below. Thank you.